Greetings. So for a while now, there's been this talking point that a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago or whatever, the Christian apologists were denying that there were any Jews in Africa, but then they were forced to admit that there were in fact Jews in Africa after being shown the evidence. And I wanted to make a very quick video on this to show that this sort of talking point is really at risk of being a broad brush misrepresentation insofar that while it might be true of some, it is not true of others, as it's certainly not true of me. And I'd like to try to demonstrate that by showing a few different social media posts from years ago from myself, and I'll post links to these. Some of these are public, some of them are in private forms, but whatever the case, I'll post links to everything I show here in the video description. And what I want to start with is this thread here from the Biblical Rumble Room, which is unfortunately not a public forum, but whatever the case, the relevant thread, it's right here. As you can see, the date right there, it's from March of 2020, and that's important. And so this thread was started by Dante Fortson, and this thread is one of my earliest exchanges with Dante. And it was him making a post accusing Ashkenazim collectively of, as you see there, quote-unquote identity theft. And so I commented on it, and I won't go through the whole thread, but I'll scroll through it slowly so those who are interested can pause and look at it. But, I initially left a comment which tried to bring in some of the genetic evidence, but also got into how, definitions are important and how you're not going to determine someone's lineage across millennia just from their outward appearance. And Dante responded, and I offered my response again. You can pause the video if you want to read through it. But what I want to focus on, I'm going to get to it right here. So one of Dante's talking points, and again, this is 4 years ago, but one of the things that Dante said, if I can highlight it here, he said that all records say that Judaism was in West Africa. This is one of his talking points. So in my response, this is what I wrote to him. See if I could put it right here. Forgive me. All right, it's right here. He said, all records say that Judaism was in West Africa. And here's my response to him. That was never a point of dispute between us. Of course, forms of Judaism were practiced by some in West Africa, so to East Africa, North Africa, West Asia, Central Asia, Eastern Europe, Western Europe, etc. But how does that have any impact on what I wrote in my initial post? So just to be clear that 4 years ago, I was saying that, this is not a position that I've taken, And if I could just show the date here, it's right here. Tuesday, March 24th, 2020. All right, so this is more than 4 years ago. Now, there's an edit there, so let me show the edits just for the sake of full disclosure. All the edits are likewise from March of 2020. And just to be clear, I'm going to show the most recent edit. Let's see, where is it? Right here. And again, it's the same line. All records say Judaism is in West Africa, and I said that was never a point of dispute between us. Of course, Judaism was found in West Africa and East Africa and North Africa and West Asia and Central Asia and Eastern Europe, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And again, I wrote this back in March of 2020. So that's 4 years ago. So this talking point does not apply to me. And I'd like to show something else, if I could really quickly show this tweet that I wrote. And note the date here. This is in 2015. So it's nearly 9 years ago, June of 2015. And what I wrote there is, Jews went into Africa and Europe. That does not mean that an African or a European with a yarmulke descends from Jacob. In short, to say that there were Jews in a particular region does not lead to the conclusion that other people from that region or other people with features stereotypically associated with that region also automatically descend from Jacob, right? This is something I've been pointing out for years. Let me just show a couple other threads. This is a thread also from 2020. This is a public thread, so it'll be easy for those to follow the link to it. I want to show you something that I wrote back then. So this is, I highlighted it here. So just to be clear, see, this is me writing this. And I wrote, among a number of other talking points, I wrote, quote, I interpret Deuteronomy 28:64 fairly literally, which would have to mean there are descendants of Jacob among the African diaspora in the Americas. And there's no edits on this. And if I could just pull up the date really quickly, forgive me. There's the date right there, March of 2020, March 10th of 2020. Okay, and this wasn't a new thing for me, as I can show you here, a tweet that I wrote, and again, I'll link to everything so people can see this. I also wrote this here, the same thing. I said, I don't claim to have any insights on anyone's lineage, but I am partial to reading Kal ha'amim, all nations, peoples, in Deuteronomy 28:64, fairly literally, it's the same thing that I was saying in this other thread, okay? So the point of this short video is just to clarify that at least some of us were saying for years, for close to a decade, at least as far as what could be documented, but I'm honestly, aside from what's already been documented, I would say that, I've been saying this even longer than that. But nonetheless, for years, some of us, like myself, have been saying that yes, there were Jews in Africa, including West Africa, including descendants of Jacob, and so on and so forth, right? Just as there were Jews nearly everywhere else. But that tells us nothing about lineages across millennia. What was shown here serves as a counterweight to this talking point that we just mentioned, this claim that the Christian apologists were claiming there were no Jews in Africa. And with that in mind, and this is going to be on a closing note, let me just say that for years now, I've been accused of going after low-hanging fruit. And people still accuse me of going after low-hanging fruit to this day. And that's fine, actually, right? I will admit that my foci are rather narrow, precisely because my interests are narrow, and the topics I'm familiar with are somewhat limited, rather limited. And aside from that, I've also been accused of broad brushing, which I do think is flatly false, as I think I've consistently made very clear and nuanced distinctions. But I wanted to mention that because if we're going to accuse people of broad brushing or going after low-hanging fruit, let's let those accusations go out fairly and in all directions, right? Because saying Christian apologists denied that there were ever any Jews in Africa sounds like broad brushing to me, at least from my vantage point. If you want to say some Christian apologists or certain Christian apologists said that, then be specific about who precisely they are and show where they said such, right? Feel free to name and shame specific individuals. But I'm also wondering if we can acknowledge that certain other folks, like myself, were not doing that. And on the topic of low-hanging fruit, saying year after year after year, they denied Jews in Africa, but here are Jews in Africa, doesn't seem to advance the conversation, right? Perhaps we can get to some more nuanced issues, stuff that I touched on in the threads that I just showed, from 4 years ago and more. Each person, I think, should be clear about the definition of Israelite they're working with, and then be clear about the methodologies for seeing who meets that definition, right? That would be better than just reverting to this talking point over and over again. Food for thought. But on that note, I'll close this video here. As always, I welcome any comments, questions, or criticisms, so feel free to share your thoughts, and God bless.